It might
You didn't
be.
tell me I wasn't going to be able to see anything.
Well, they should turn lights on for you and give him a tan.
Just don't unplug that plug.
Well, hello everyone. I'm TomKopchak. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up and sticking around to bear with me and listen to me talk for a little while. Thanks to the board and everything, but it's a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about printer security. Now you're probably thinking right about now, Tom, there's so many more exciting things we could be talking about right now. They're printers, for God's sakes. They sit in the office, people print things out, they don't complain about them until they don't work, which is quite frequently. But there's a lot more to printers than just pages spitting out and users, making whatever they want to print. And from a network perspective, the network printer is something that could be used as an interesting attack vector. It's something that can be exploited. It can be used like just any other node on the network to do something. So I want to talk a little bit about printer security, why printers are vulnerable to attacks, and some kind of suggestions for what you guys can do to secure them. If anything, my executive summary for this talk is printers are evil. You got to remember that. Printers are evil. Printer's not going to be your friend. There are a lot of things that they can do that you might not think of originally. And that's kind of what I want to emphasize. So, first and foremost, why printers? Like I said, there's so many things we could be talking about, but I'm talking about printers. When you look at the back of a network printer, you're going to see something like this most frequently. It's got a power cord and Ethernet cable. First thing you should think when you see something with a power cord and Ethernet cable, what is that doing on my network? What kind of services is providing? There's some data that's going to that system. Well, a network printer does a lot more than just print. First and foremost, you have the printing service. That's the thing that users throw data at, pages spit out, everyone's happy. But in addition to that, you also have some sort of web interface for managing the device, changing settings, configuring things. You also will see some kind of different management protocols. A lot of printers run SNMP, other services like that. And some printers also have local storage, hard drives, management unit. If it's an all-in-one device, there could be scanning services, all these sorts of things, all in one device. So a printer is not just a printer. You can think of it more of a mini server on your network. And any kind of server, you need to secure that, just like it would be a web server, or a file server, or a domain controller, or something like that. Another reason that printers can be a very attractive target are that authentication is very, very limited. When was the last time you had to enter a password to print something? You generally really don't. Printing is something that just happens. There are some solutions that exist for using like a smart card authentication process or requiring a password to print. But the deployments of those and the implementations are few and far between. So more often than not, printing is unauthenticated. Another aspect of printers is resource exhaustion attacks. Now I'm not talking in the sense of TCP and UDP ports here. I'm talking about physical things. Paper, ink, things that have a financial cost to a business. Ink is expensive. Paper isn't as expensive, but people get mad when you kill trees for some reason. Found this interesting graph that kind of puts this into perspective. This was a relative cost of various liquids. Basically what this came to the conclusion as, if you look at this, we all complain about the price of gas. Crude oil is basically free compared to printer ink. So, granted, your car uses a lot more gas than your printer uses ink. But still, it's an interesting comparison. And they said that the only liquids that this person who did this study could find that were more expensive include some perfumes, mercury, LSD, and scorpion venom than printer ink. So, it's an interesting comparison. So they compared it to vodka, Red Bull, penicillin, bottled water, and all those kind of things, and the HP ink was the most expensive. So it has a real financial cost. One thing when you're thinking about an embedded system, a print server, they're not the same as a regular server running a full-blown server operating system. It's a system that's designed to be a small footprint, running as little services as possible, an embedded system. Because it's embedded, embedded systems are secure, right? I heard it from someone in the back there. Not even close. So in order to kind of look at vulnerabilities that exist in embedded systems and kind of head off our discussion of embedded systems and printer vulnerabilities, I want to explore a couple of historical cases and relate these to some other devices that we might be familiar with. I'm sure everyone's seen one of these things before. Consumer router gets, grandma, your kids, everyone else to get on the internet. There's a lot of possible attacks that these are vulnerable to. A couple that I found, there's cross-site scripting attacks that you can throw against these using the web interface by using DHCP requests. You could send a host name that has cross-site scripting code in it, and what would end up happening is the code would just get injected into the web browser and become part of the router's configuration. This is because most routers don't properly sanitize host names and DHCP requests. I could imagine you do the same thing as Adrian mentioned earlier, maybe with Unicode. Probably they don't sanitize that either, I wouldn't expect. So, it's also possible to register a machine on the network on a lot of routers using a public domain name. So you could say your laptop is www.google.com. And then all of a sudden, everyone on that network is going to have their traffic bounced through the router and pointed back at the internal IP as your machine. So you'll be spoofing DNS automatically using that. There's also authentication bypass attacks for routers, where you can, most routers, they do password protect the web interface. But a lot of times the web interface is throwing variables at management scripts. And a lot of times these management scripts are just publicly accessible and not password protected whatsoever. So if you know what parameters to send and how to format it for the specific brand of router, you can bypass the configuration completely and configure it however you want, skipping the web interface without any issues whatsoever. So yep, secure. Another device that has seen its share of security vulnerabilities and is an embedded platform is the network camera. There are multiple vendors for these, and quite a few of them have seen authentication bypass attacks. I was doing some research on this, and you could pretty much see anything from a couple weeks ago, a major issue came out with TrendNet, to back in 2003 when they were first released. Now some of these cameras, you could simply go to a different URL and it would bypass the authentication mechanism. One vendor, you could just do a / in the URL and it would automatically dump you into the configuration page without any problem. There's also buffer overflow or information disclosure vulnerabilities. Linksys had a vulnerability on their cameras that you could send a specially crafted packet and it would dump the entire running configuration right out to you, including your wireless key, your administrative password, everything else. Really nice things to have if you're an attacker. And it's just coming from a camera. And the TrendNet vulnerabilities that was part of the media frenzy, I guess, earlier this year, they were just a matter of going to a certain web directory, and that would allow you to configure the device or remotely access it. So even though a lot of these vulnerabilities are earlier, they're still being discovered in these embedded devices. And the problem with the embedded devices is you have to wait for your vendor to patch it. It's not an operating system that we can do tricks to try to make it more secure. If they did something stupid, you're stuck with it, and that's the problem. And my last example, I think this is just a great combination of all kinds of things going wrong. And some of you know where I'm going with this, but this is a police dash cam. There's a pen tester, Kevin Finister. He discovered a lot of vulnerabilities in a city's dash cam system. The whole idea of this was you would have the ability for dispatch to receive live video footage from the cruisers as things are happening and kind of manage all these sorts of things. Well, it turns out that these were not just accessible by the mission controller, the dispatch. They were publicly routable on the internet over a Verizon wireless cellular connection. Now the cars in the back, they had a DVR recorder, your cellular internet connection, some form of router to get the cellular internet connection to the DVR. And some combination of vulnerabilities allowed the traffic to just go straight into the DVR from the internet. As you can imagine, bad things happened as a result of this. Since it wasn't a private network and a public network, anyone could get to it. So one example, you could just start a telnet session to the back of the cop car and access all the files and directories on there. If you kind of look at this, they do a directory listing, you see these dates as directories. You jump into those further, you had MPEG files of recorded police incidents, which you could proceed to download and watch. You could delete them too. You know, that's a good thing to do if you're a criminal or something like that. So one of the things they saw on the back of the cop, or on the DVR, was this. Traffic stop, just from the comfort of your own home, pulled right off of the back of the DVR. Another thing you could do, with a little bit of research using a well-known tool called Google, they found the manual for this and the software to use. And you could get live geotag streaming video from the back of the cruiser with audio.
That's a feature. So you get a map of all the cop cars.
Basically, if you're a criminal, this is what you want to have. You know what the cops are talking about, and you know where they are, and you can see where they are on a map. I mean, if you're going to do something wrong, what more would you want?
The detectives have to.
I know.
They're not on the
Like
radio,
this.
so you can't tell where they are.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Well, as you can see though, these are all embedded devices. They're secure. Printers are embedded devices. They're secure. No. So let's get back to printers. If I remember how to use PowerPoint. Usually whenever you see something on a network, the first thing that someone will do as a security person is do a port scan of it. So that's exactly what I did to the printer in our office. Hit it up with just a standard Nmap scan with a couple flags in there to see what services are running on it. And you see quite a few that pop up. Couple that you'd expect, the web interface, TCP/80, 9100 for your PDL JetDirect, 515 for LPD, the line printer daemon. There's Samba running on this for some reason. NetBIOS, TCP 139, Echo service, TCP 7. And then there's port 9999 and 10,002, which I could find no documentation about what those ports were actually doing or why they were open. Needless to say, after I presented this to our company, it got very difficult to print the day afterwards. But it's also not uncommon to see 161 and 162 for SNMP open as well. You can see that the Nmap scan showed successful version detection, saying this is a printer running an HP embedded operating system, tells you the version, all that kind of stuff. So you can clearly tell this is a printer, these are the services it's offering, and it does seem to be doing a lot more on the network than just handling printing requests. Another thing you notice is the printer's results as being scanned. The printer sees the Nmap scan as an incoming print job, and being a printer, it does what a printer does, it prints it. So you can see you got HTTP requests coming in, you know, GET request that's hitting up. So as the process of doing the version detection, hitting port 9100, you're generating a lot of print jobs.
That's like better than DV.
Well, I'm going to get to that. There are some benefits of this. You know, you don't need drivers or anything like that to print stuff if you want to. But pretty much, you know, it's doing version detection and things like that. This is just packets that it's printing out, that it's getting. So I'm sure probably a decent number of you have seen pages that look something like this coming out of your printer. Hopefully you might have known what they're for.
Now, on modern versions of Nmap, though, since 2005 or so, I put port 9100 and so forth were like considered unsafe ports that automatically probe them and won't probe them unless you explicitly say, and also do the non-safe ports.
Yeah, I might have.
No, it'll default scan anyway.
I think this is just a pretty default
Or not,
scan.
but I'm pretty sure he's turned off the version scanning on it by default.
That's the command I
Yeah,
ran.
you might be.
So I'm not sure if you'd be able to see that, but there's quite a few flags, I guess. I did a.
Was that printer using PostScript? Is that why it printed? Or?
That was just pretty much the port 9100 traffic, which is the JetDirect PCL port.
Way back in the day, anything you sent it would go ahead and print it out, because I remember making a university print out reams and paper across the entire campus.
That's not way back in the day, it's still now. If you have port 9100, you throw anything at it, it will print it.
But my understanding was newer versions of InMap, they put 9100 on a ban list of not to probe to see if it was open, but not to do version detection on it because it was considered a non-stable, or I can't remember the what Fyodor's terminology, but
Kill all the trees port.
Safe check, something like that.
But yeah, this is what happened in the office doing that version of the Nmap scan. Now, I'm sure there could be some flags that you could use to kind of suppress that, but pretty much if you're hitting a printer on that data port, it's going to do something with it. So now I want to talk a little bit about printer authentication and how that works out. So now that we've covered printer authentication, does anyone have any questions? Seriously though, for printer authentication, network printing is generally unauthenticated. You send the traffic to the printer and it prints it. Printers, they're considered network clients. They got to be close to the users because people don't want to walk that far to get print jobs. So you find them on the same subnet, the same broadcast domain as the clients. The traffic to the printer generally in this case is not filtered or otherwise controlled. Same broadcast domain, all the traffic from any machine on that network will get to the printer. So it's not really locked down at all. And as I was saying, the HP JetDirect compatible printers, they listen on TCP 9100. And that's pretty much a common standard for network printing, even with non-HP vendors, just for compatibility. So I'm sure you guys have seen network diagrams before, but probably not the best slide for this audience. But if you have a switch, if you have a desktop and a laptop all connected to that switch and a network printer, all these devices, regardless of if they're set up to use this printer or not, they can print. So this leads to a couple interesting possibilities. You don't need drivers. Simply cat the contents of a file to a telnet of the printer's IP address on port 9100, and you're good to go. So depending on how the printer's configured, you could also send spool files, PCL files, PostScript files using the same method and print them out. Because the printer could understand these as an incoming print job and process it. So simply run this command. I didn't even bother sending a file in this case. I just used the printer as a typewriter. So you start typing on it, you end the telnet session, and the next thing you know, this thing spits out. No drivers required, none of that stuff. So if your users ever complain about print drivers, just tell them to use telnet.
What was the locations you had? It said something about the spool file on the thing? Oh, okay.
They just, yeah,
I just confused that.
yeah, it's not a location, sorry about that. But just if you have those types of files, you might be able to send them at the printer and have it process them. So another thing you can do, seriously, it's just a printer, but things happen. Change your LCD text through a telnet session. So instead of sending a print job, the printer sees this as a special kind of command. And instead of printing it out, it uses that to modify the contents of your LCD, and you'll end up with something like that. You can have a lot of fun with this one. Other fun things you can do with printers: denial of service attacks. If your web interface is not password protected, just make your printer your default gateway. Printers are a lot worse at serving the internet than a router. And your users are probably complaining that'll make people's lives miserable. But the phone we have. You could do network scans. Certain older JetDirects use a predictable TCP sequence number pattern, so you could actually bounce scans right off of the printer and make it look like a scan is being conducted by the printer instead of an external attacker. So how many people expect to see in their IDS reports your printer scanning you? It doesn't make sense, and it's something you might dismiss. So these types of scans do take a long period of time, and they're only effective on certain older printers, but printers aren't something that get updated that frequently, so it's very likely that you'll find something that will work for this. You can make someone's life miserable, kind of like you were mentioning. Just send the whole hard drive to the printer and walk away. Someone will notice eventually. Other evil printer uses. These come from Columbia University School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Certain HP printers allow for a remote firmware upgrade to be seen as a print job. And what's awesome is the printer doesn't check for the update's authenticity in any way, shape, or form. The update isn't signed. So you could do things like steal personal information and post it on the internet. They wrote a custom firmware for HP printers that would look at an incoming print job, parse it for sensitive personal information such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, names, addresses, birth dates, all that kind of stuff, and then just post it on Twitter from the printer itself. Other things that they suggested you might be able to do is burn down the office by continuously heating up the fuser until the printer caught on fire. I don't really understand why you'd want to do this if your printer is already posting everyone's information on the internet anyway. You're kind of killing, you know, your best card in the game, but it's something that they say can be done. I'm sorry?
Out of 6 days.
Yeah, you know, gotta do that.
As long as you get your red stapler with you.
Yeah. Now the researchers, they're saying that this is something that's possible. HP is denying the claim, saying that there's a physical thermal switch that'll cause the printer to essentially blow up, shut off the fuser before anything bad really happens. I tend to side with HP on this just because it is a hardware design that would be very, very difficult to circumvent. However, they're saying that other printers might not implement their hardware design the same way, and it could be possible. Still, I don't think burning down the office is as good of an idea as stealing personal information, especially if you're a remote attacker. But, you know, it makes for good journalism, too, so I wouldn't say necessarily good journalism, but stuff that people notice. One of the things that's also interesting about the remote firmware upgrade is your remote firmware upgrade could be set in such a way that it prohibits future firmware upgrades. So you kind of have a situation where you can't overwrite the firmware on the printer at all to fix the problem. So it's not like you can go ahead and re-image a printer or install new firmware on it in that case. So you could end up with an infected printer that you pretty much have to replace in this situation to resolve the problem. Now that we've talked about all these vulnerabilities, you know, it's only something you need to worry about locally, right? Because no one would ever open up their printer to the internet, right? Not quite. Doing a little Google search, you're looking for a string in the HP website. 4 out of the 5 top hits here were just configuration pages for HP printers. You can get a lot of good information off of these things. Host names, you can find out, you know, serial numbers, all that kind of stuff. Get network settings, so you could find about what certain servers are, what your DNS servers are. So if you're doing a penetration test or reconnaissance on a site, you can get some information that you know is, with a pretty good degree of certainty, is valid just by looking at the printer web pages. Found another site here that you could find out it had a hard drive in the printer, 120 gigs, listed right here. That provides a pretty interesting area of an attack. And you could look for maybe information on that printer or target it as a source of information. One of the pen tests that we did as part of Hurricane Labs at one point discovered a Xerox Work Center that had about 7 years of documents archived on the hard drive. That was pretty much not protected whatsoever. So printers, you know, they could essentially turn into file servers without the same restrictions and protections of a file server. And this one I found particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. First thing, it was completely wide open to the internet. I had to go with the Google cache because this was since fixed. By who, we don't really know. But every aspect of this printer could be configured from the internet. Also, the host name is a rit.edu address, which is where I went to college, so I found that to also be kind of humorous. But needless to say, letting anyone else on the network besides the system administrator configure the printer is a bad idea. Letting everyone else in the world configure a printer is a really bad idea. Hey, you know, if you can't configure it, let someone else do it and hope they know what they're doing, I guess. And hopefully they won't post everything on Twitter in the process. So now that we've gone over all these vulnerabilities, we want to take away how we can secure these devices, how we can protect them. So I have a couple suggestions to share with you guys. First and foremost, check your configuration. There's a lot of things on printers that come enabled by default. A lot of unnecessary services, all those things, and they can be turned off or otherwise disabled if you check the configuration. A lot of people just plug in a printer and expect it to work. You can do more than that. Beware of your default passwords, your SNMP community string of public, all those sorts of things. And enabled services. And also, if you're going to password protect your printers, not yet. When you password protect your printers, make sure you use different passwords. There were some attacks that involved dumping the printer's configuration, including the passwords, in plain text. So you really don't want the password protecting your printers to be the same as your administrative account for your domain admins group. Just in case someone compromises the printer, there's not that much they can do with that account if it's one that's only used for managing your printers. Go ahead and update your printer and network card firmware to the latest versions. Seriously, I would expect a better response from this group, but how many of you have seriously checked or updated the firmware on a printer on your network? And this is a group of security people, so we have 5 people who did that?
I know it needs done too.
Yeah, it just like seriously, what do you think about printer firmware upgrades? What? Security holes printers? It just doesn't click all the time. So, I know what some of you might be doing tomorrow. Or maybe not at all, but at least I tried. If you can, go ahead and find a way to route your printing traffic instead of making it on the same broadcast domain as your network, or as your users. Separate your printers on a dedicated VLAN so that traffic has to traverse a routed boundary or even a firewall in order to get through. Instead of sending print traffic directly at the printer, manage the printing. So use a central print server, and in this respect it functions as an application layer firewall for printing. Anything that's a malformed print job that contains a remote firmware upgrade, that contains changing printer text on the LCD panel or something like that, the print server is going to see that come in and be like, what the heck is this? This isn't a print job. Reject that. And then you can configure the printers to only communicate with your print server. So that'll really cut down on the possibility of anyone on your network or in the world running something against your printer and sending print jobs when they shouldn't be doing it, sending malicious print jobs, or doing anything like that. If you can, lock down management access using ACLs, things like you would for any network device. Consider your printers to be just as important as your router's management interface, as your switch's management interfaces, those sorts of things. And this goes without saying, but don't open your printers up to the internet. It's a bad idea. So with those suggestions, I leave you with the fact that I hope that the only cats that end up printing out of your printer are those that you actually send yourself. Any questions? Yeah, Adrian.
Have you been using a hijacker for storing files on other people's printers?
You've definitely seen cases where you can FTP into printers.
Well, this is something called hijacker. You can actually use PJL commands over
Oh, okay.
9100 to put files and grab files off.
Because what the printer uses that hard drive for is a cache. So you're essentially spoofing a printing operation as a file store. So
There's so many multifunction printers out there. You can scan a network, find a couple web servers, then you can go look and say, oh, this person has a timesheet out there with a social security number on it.
Wait, how do you grab the data off the actual folder? If it has a hard drive, how do you?
Well, there are ones different ways. I mean, sometimes you can actually scan the network and they'll maybe just like depending on a web server or FTP server like he mentioned. There's also PJL commands, printer job or printer job language, I believe. Is it
yeah, page description language, I think.
Page description? Oh,
Yeah, it's
PJL.
It's an acronym.
But, no, not PCL. PJ. There's a different one for actually controlling the printer, and you can use commands to actually.
Exactly what this is.
Yes.
A PJL command.
PJL command to put and get off files. The Phenolette crew from Europe made a tool called Hijacker for doing it.
Yeah, so you're essentially sending a print job as far as the network's concerned but the printer sees it as, hey, I need to do this. And the printer will do what it wants because it's a printer.
Now, there was a guy, who was the guy who was, he gave something that talks something like this, that, Dave? The guy who was making a file system out of printers.
Oh, Ben Smith?
No, not Dale,
No,
Ben Smith, yes.
Ben Smith.
He was actually working on, I think, using those PJL commands to make a file system distributed amongst a bunch of printers.
That's pretty awesome.
Do you get,
The
when we're
exile.
ready for jet direct charge?
Exile.
I'll make up some for
Former Clevelander.
That's fun, Joe.
Any other questions? Well, hopefully some of you guys will be updating. No?
A lot of scanning printers will usually have credentials for SMB or FTP or others devices. Are those usually stored pretty insecurely?
Generally, yeah. Once I got into the web interface of one printer that I was looking at, you had pretty much a working email account for a company that you could get. You knew what the mail server was, you knew what the password was, you knew an account. And that's a pretty piece of valuable information that you can just pull off a printer. So,
back with SNMP before too.
Yeah.
multifunction printers, they have that whole feature where you can just send stuff as emails instead of scanning it, or instead of printing it or something
scans
like
and
that.
saves to an SMB share or
Yep.
or an FTP.
It's got to have credentials to do that, so it's stored on the device. And typically they aren't using the best mechanisms for storing those because it's a printer, and they don't really think of that.
Yeah. What's it gonna do?
Well, I hope it was something for everyone to think about, a different area of security that isn't really focused on a lot. So thank you very much, everyone.
Good talk.
Very good.